All right, hello and welcome. It's been a minute since we've done a last Epoch video, but I guess now's a good time, in quotes, a good time to do it because there's some pretty significant news that dropped yesterday, and it actually has a pretty big impact on a video I did recently. So what I want to do is I want to cover just quickly what the news was, what it generally means for the game, and then what it means for my video, so to speak. We'll go into that a little bit more. Just a quick recap or update on what I did. I put out a video on trade and outlined an idea that I believed would fit all of the goals of both the community and EHG, which there were two separate kind of goals for that system, and I believe this one would accommodate both sides. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about where EHG is right now on trade, and whether or not this system will fit with the goals that both community and EHG had. But first, let's talk about what they've actually done here. So effectively, if you go back to all the way to Kickstarter, EHG has stated that they were going to do some sort of trade system that had an economy. It wouldn't be a full economy. It would not be like PoEs, like where you can trade whatever you want, unlimited. That was always stated. That's not new information by any means. They've always been very clear about that. Done a great job of making it clear that it won't be PoE economy simulator, but there was going to be an economy. It was going to be the bazaar for a while, which was a idea that was cool on paper, but really had a lot of issues. And eventually they scrapped that idea and said, okay, well, we're going to go to some other trade system and we have to explore what that is. So we'll get back to you when we figure out what that's going to be. Well, they've explored those ideas and apparently decided that they're all bad. None of them do what they want to do, and the best idea is just not have an economy at all, which is how we end up with what is item gifting for 0.9. So item gifting is going to be the ability to, if you're in a party with somebody and something drops, you can gift it to them. You can gift it to them during the instance that you're in, the echo or the map, or later as well. It will remember who was in your party at the time, and so you can gift it pretty much whenever you want to, but they had to be in the party when it dropped, or else you cannot. And I believe they had to be in the instance when the item dropped as well for you to be able to receive, or for you to be able to give it to them. So that's what we have now. They even state in here that they have decided to pivot away from having economy-based trade and cancel the plans for the bazaar. The bazaar thing was known. Like, we knew that they were canceling that. Because they did put out a post probably 6 months or so ago. So that's not new information. The pivoting away from economy-based trade is definitely new information. This was not known before. There was at no point can I remember, and I follow very closely, EHG stating that they were thinking about even pivoting away from an economy-based trade. As far back as I think April, they were talking about the different kinds of currency that they might use in a trading system. So this is definitely a new development for them. So this is what we're going to have for 0.9. They have not directly closed the door about doing anything else, but this post doesn't suggest that they will, and in fact states in no uncertain terms that they've tried other things and found them all to be lacking, including an auction house, which is what I suggested. They have not stated why those were lacking, what they found lacking about them, and why they felt they could not actually implement something like that. But they have laid out in a very basic way that those aren't good enough for them, at least right now, but this somehow is. So let's go into what I talked about in my video. So I actually laid out a full auction house system, but that's not super relevant right now, because what is relevant is that I chose that system because I believed it hit the priorities of EHG and the player base. Now, the EHG priorities are well known and documented, so it was easy for me to get those. The player base, I will admit, I had to do some of my own sort of, I guess you could say, research, just like understanding what players generally want and trying to find the priorities that I believe fit everyone in the community, or as many people as possible. Admittedly, these won't be priorities for every player in the community, but if you hit all of these priorities, basically almost every player would be satisfied. There'd be edge cases, but almost everyone would be generally satisfied with come up with. They'll have hit on those priorities for the most part, for most players who want to play this game based upon what they thought this game was going to be, based upon what EHG said it was going to be. So let's go ahead and just talk about what the priorities are, and compare them to the gifting system and say, okay, are these priorities met? So we'll start with EHG, which is the easy one, because of course EHG is hitting their priorities. You kind of expect that. So the first thing they wanted to do is they wanted to limit real money transactions. In my video, I gave some examples of how you can do that. For the most part, none of those are really done except for the player direct trade restrictions, because they're just restricting it to you have to be in a party. So this is definitely going to limit RMT, because, well, if there's no economy, it's really hard to have RMT. It doesn't prevent RMT. So here's an example of how RMT can still exist in the game with no economy. So trade parties are created, farming parties. So maybe there's a Discord out there and there is a setup for 4-player farming parties with 1 or 2 players, maybe even 3 players. In fact, 3 players would probably be fairly likely, depending on how it's set up, that go into a timeline and farm particular items for 1 or more players that need those items. So let's say you need Wings of Argentis. You go into this Discord, you hire this person or these people, and they continuously run the timeline for it. Forget the name of it, but they continuously kill God Hunter Argentis until you get your Wings of Argentis. You get it, you pay them a particular amount of money, RMT. So you can't completely remove it, because the gifting system allows some form of trade, and there's always some way of using that, especially when there's a target farmable game like this, to speed up the process for somebody by, effectively doing the work for them, and therefore making some sort of real money transaction based on it. So that's not completely killed, but it's limited, and that was the goal. Like, I don't think EHG ever realistically thought they were going to completely destroy RMT in their game without having even bigger consequences than the system already has, which has massive consequences, honestly. So I think they ultimately are hitting this priority pretty well. The next one is to not devalue item acquisition through gameplay. Well, if gameplay is effectively the only way you can acquire items, then you clearly haven't devalued it through a trade system that doesn't really exist. So therefore, this priority is met by default, because you can't not meet it if you have no alternative. The third one, not create an economic simulator. Again, if there's no economy, then there is no economic simulator. Like, obviously, we've hit this one. No problem. Great. Awesome. We're doing great. EHG, awesome job to hit your priority so far. And not need a third-party app. No problem. There's no need for a third-party app if there's no economy, if there's no effective way to trade except for the gifting system. And, of course, the gifting system seems like it'll work well enough, and I can't think of any reason why you need a third-party app for the gifting system anyway, except for, like, a Discord for RMT or something like that. But I think ultimately there's no significant need for a third-party app outside of, like, creating trade parties or something like that. This is pretty much hit. I don't see really any reason to think this is not hit. So HG, good job. You hit your priorities. Awesome. How about for players though? How does this work out for players? We're gonna start actually with the one that I do think they hit, which is the third one on here. Make it so players who don't want to trade don't have to. Well, yeah. Again, by default, you've hit this because you don't have anything to trade, so there is no trade. Now, you could argue that gifting is kind of like trading, and you could also argue that multiplayer is going to be far more efficient than single player with the gifting system, because you can effectively, at least under many circumstances, increase the likelihood of a drop by 4 by being in a party. And I think there's some merit to that, and there could be some pressure to party up and use the gifting system. And so you could make an argument that this isn't fully realized, because players might feel the pressure to link up in order to get the drops that they want, because they can't get them on their own, and having four times the chance could be good. And under certain circumstances, if you need one thing and someone else needs something else, and you just like coordinate that and you do it with 4 people, everyone could like super benefit from that. But I do think that's going to be probably a bit of an edge case. I do believe that multiplayer is going to be more efficient, but I don't think it's going to be so much more efficient that everyone feels like they have to play in multiplayer. So I don't think this is like a major issue on that. I do think this ultimately, this priority is effectively hit. You won't feel like you need to trade because you won't be able to trade. Therefore, again, by default, this priority is hit. So for anyone who was worried about having to trade, like having a solo self-found environment that was not well balanced because trade put everything out of whack, and so they feel like they have to trade in order to get the stuff they want, that's not going to happen, because there's not going to be any economy and no reason to balance for an economy. All right, so far EHG is doing great here, right? They're 4 for 4 on their own stuff, and they're 1 for 1 on players. So let's go to the stuff that they didn't do so well on. So the first one, make trading relatively convenient, not too much friction. I mean, I guess you could say they did this because if there's no trade, there's no friction, but it's not convenient because there's no trade, right? There's no way of making trade convenient if you can't trade. The gifting system is convenient, sort of, except for there's one big issue. That is, if this system is meant for like friends playing together, which it appears to be, one of the big things they're getting in the forums is, well, okay, so I'm playing with friend whatever, Tim, and I'm playing with Joe, and Tim and I play a lot, but Joe doesn't play quite as much. When he does, he definitely wants to play with us. So what we generally want to do is we want to kind of keep him up to speed with us. So like if something drops that's really good for him, we want to hold on to it and give it to him when he comes back on. Well, unfortunately, gifting, you have to be in the party and I think in the instance at the same time, so that can't happen. Here's the problem. If they allow them to do that, if they allow you to give, I think I said Tim was the one that was not playing as much. If they allow you to give Tim something when he's not playing, it opens up pre-trade. Because now you just add people to your friends list and then you trade with them and you form trade like groups of friends. So like these trade groups are created and like it opens up a whole can of worms, which is to say that I know why EHG didn't do that. However, because they didn't do that, there's a level of convenience that is a significant level of convenience that is lost with the I want to trade with my friends group. They just don't have that ability. So anyone who doesn't play as much is going to fall farther behind, and they might just quit. Like they might just stop playing because of that. So that's a pretty big downside of the gifting system as it is. You cannot do that. So there is a bit of convenience that does not exist within the system itself, and then there's a huge bit of convenience that does not exist because there is no economy. So any economy style convenience can't happen because there's no economy. I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but like I just want to hammer down. If there's no economy, you can't hit some of these priorities because they require an economy at a base level to even think about it. The last one is to make it meaningful, and I think this one is pretty clearly not happening. Like of all of them, this is like the one that they're so far from that it's kind of crazy to think about that we got this point at all. A team that was saying that we were going to have trade for all this time comes to the point where they came up with trade that is very not meaningful for the vast majority of players. The only people it's even remotely meaningful for are people who are partying together and stuff is dropping while they're playing, and that's going to be a pretty small group of the player base. Anyone who plays solo has no meaning whatsoever at a trade because there is none for them. It just does not exist. So this is not a meaningful trade system for anyone who wanted a meaningful trade system, and therefore there's not really anything about convenience to talk about. So I say for the players, they've hit 1 out of 3. While they've hit all their own priorities, they've actually they failed a large portion of the player base by having this system. And I think if they didn't create the expectation up front, so they didn't talk about the bizarre, they haven't talked about trade for literally years, always in the positive that we were going to do that thing, make very, what's the word I want, like direct comments about having trade, having it literally in their Kickstarter that they were going to do trade and that they thought trade was important, an important part of ARPGs. And also that you'd be able to trade with people in your friends list. They actually put that in their Kickstarter. Like all these things they put in there are now not happening. Do I think they're lying? No, I think they've shifted, but I also think it's a broken promise. So that like they've broken this promise to players. So there's this expectation that's being created, and now some of these priorities that players have are just like they don't exist anymore because those players are not being catered to in the slightest. And I think that's a huge problem. If they hadn't started with the idea that there would be trade and stuck with it for so long, I think they could have got out of this without so many players being upset. But they did. And their decision to just like drop it is definitely like it's a broken promise. I don't know how else to word that. I don't know how to be like more positive about what happened here. I get why they're doing what they're doing, but to me, if you make a promise like this, you can't just like take it back. Like, oops, we actually don't like it anymore. Like you have to find a way to work with it. And I don't feel like that's what happened here. And because of that, a large portion, I should also mention, like there's most of their marketing has gone to PoE players. Like if you look at the people who they sponsor to stream the game, like the big streamers, if you look at where most of their marketing resources seem to have gone, historically, it's not towards Diablo, this is a Diablo style system. Diablo 3, by the way, Diablo 4 will have a much more robust trading system than this. The Diablo 3s of the world weren't getting marketed to. Like you never see Rax playing the game, Wudiju, as far as like being sponsored by EHG. You see Steel Mage, you see Zizaran. Those people are the people who expect trade. So it's kind of weird that they've spent all this time marketing to PoE, and then they're like, actually, one of the like major features of PoE that a lot of you PoE players not only love but expect and require in your game is just not going to be a part of ours. I do hope that over time they continue to evolve and go back towards some sort of a trade system. They do not need to have open trade. I don't want them to have like fully open trade, but they need to have some sort of economy. It's just a part of like the identity of what they said this game was going to be. And to just be like, actually, no, I just don't, it's not a good look. I want to be more positive about this and generally about things that EHG has been doing later. I just am struggling to do so. And this one coming out so close to what was a pretty meh development blog on 0.9, and also the dates that were released being so far from what players had already had hoped for, which was already so far from expectations based upon, again, previous previous news and information that they've released, and just communications with players going back as far as saying that multiplayer would be released in multiplayer would be released in 2021, and here we are looking at March 2023. There's just a lot of L's that we're taking right now, and trade is just yet another L that I think they're taking, even though like there's a sizable portion of the current player base who's totally fine, that's even happy with this. There's a large portion that's also very, very, very unhappy with this, to the extent that many of them are saying, this is not the game for me anymore. Like, I just know it's not. So even if you're one of those people who's in the make it so players who don't want to trade don't have to camp, we have to recognize that there's a large player base now that feels like they've just been effectively lied to, and actually spent money on this game with the expectation that they would be able to trade, and now they can't do that, and that's not really fair to those players. And also all this marketing going into PoE, it's not a good look, and it's going to significantly limit how many players are actually going to want to play this game compared to what it would have been if there was at least some trade system to try out. So all this is to say, I don't think they did a very good job. I think the priorities of players, certainly the players that they were marketing to, while they did do a good job with theirs, it's kind of hard not to, because there's no economy anyway. So how do you not hit those priorities if they're all concerned about the economy being too powerful or too RMT heavy? You don't have economy problem solved, but it doesn't solve the problem of the players that expect to trade. And I think that's a big mistake, and I do think that they need to reevaluate where they're at with that, and really try to think about ways that they can bring into the fold players who actually expect some sort of trade, some sort of economy that they can work with and have a good time with. That's all I have on it right now. Hopefully we have better news in the future, something more positive that I can talk about. I'm kind of starving for positive news out of EHG and LE. We do have a multiplayer test coming up late January, so almost 2 months from now, but hopefully it'll be good, and hopefully there'll be something good in between then. But thank you so much for watching. I wish I had better news to those who really want trading. Hopefully we'll have better news in the future. Keep the feedback coming to EHG. Let them know how you feel, good or bad, so that they have a good understanding of like what's happening and what this means for them and for the future of the game. And I will see you all again, hopefully real soon.